Hey guys, this is the vaccine video that a lot of you have been requesting. Obviously, it's a huge topic right now. There's a lot to cover with this vaccine, whether it's safety, efficacy, side effects, who it's going to be available for, when it's going to be available for them. So much stuff, and all of it in this video is very important. The vaccine video is especially important because we're so close to having a COVID-19 vaccine. It's right around the corner, and we're finally beginning to see the light at the end of this pandemic tunnel. But the bad news is we are experiencing the worst of this pandemic with record cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. And it's going to continue to get worse before it gets better. And it's going to take time before the entire public has access to the vaccine. And once the vaccine is available to everyone, we need people to take it in order to shut down this virus. A lot of people ask the question, how is it possible a vaccine that under normal circumstances would take years to approve could be ready to roll out so quickly and prove to be so safe? Well, even before coronavirus broke out a year ago, drug companies were working on designs for new types of vaccines called mRNA vaccines or messenger RNA vaccines. And part of the reason is so that they could quickly adapt to a pandemic strain of virus. Also, researchers have been studying the first SARS virus since that outbreak in 2002 and 2003. I think I was only 22 back then. But anyway, because this SARS-CoV-2 virus is so similar to the first one, scientists have had a jump start in this regard too. There are other contributing reasons why we have these vaccines so quickly, like the logistics of Operation Warp Speed and drug companies being able to remove some of the business and financial aspects of vaccine development. Let's rewind for a second, back when I made my third coronavirus video, posted back on February 9th of this year. One of the first steps is to successfully get that novel coronavirus gene and insert it into the messenger RNA platform successfully and allow it to express proteins. He says we've succeeded in doing that. The next step is to put it in a mouse animal model to induce immunogenicity and to get the company to make gold nanoparticle products. He says all of those have been successfully implemented. He later says if that continues, we'll be in phase 1 trials in people within the next 2.5 months. And that's what happened. And now we're at the point of having 2 of these mRNA vaccines that are about to get FDA emergency use authorization, and then the CDC about to give the green light to get these vaccines in people's arms. And shipment has actually already begun. We're talking about the Pfizer/BioNTech and the Moderna vaccines here. And there's other vaccines on the horizon as well that are not mRNA vaccines. So there are 6 vaccines getting some kind of federal government support in the United States and dozens that are being developed around the world. Several of these are in phase 3 clinical trials, which is the last step before seeking the go-ahead from the FDA, at least in this country. With the 2 vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna, they synthetically make messenger RNA, which is a genetic blueprint that signals to the cells of the body to start manufacturing a specific protein in the body. Not just any protein, but part of the spike protein of the virus. The body's immune system then says, hey, we don't recognize this spike protein guy. We should kick him out of the club. So the immune system reacts accordingly, except when the immune system reacts accordingly, it's a whole cascade of events, with white blood cells causing a whole bunch of commotion, sending chemical signals to other parts of the body through the blood, with cytokines, interferons, interleukins, and antibodies. Antibodies are proteins that bind to pieces of foreign invaders so that the body is protected the next go-around. In this process, sometimes there can be symptoms as a result, such as arm pain, maybe a little fever, body ache, headache, nausea, fatigue. And this is sometimes what happens with the flu shot. Some people think that when they get the flu shot, they actually get the flu from the flu shot, but that's actually never the case. It was an immunological reaction to the vaccination, which is basically the body saying, hey, I'm responding to this vaccine in the appropriate way. But back to these mRNA vaccines for COVID-19. They come in 2 doses to be taken a few weeks apart. Why is that? Because the first dose, also known as the prime dose, although it does the job, it's less than ideal, meaning the level of protective antibodies that are developing there, they're there, but they're not as high as we really want them to be. They're like down here. We want them up here. So with this initial prime dose, the antibodies take 2 weeks to develop. But then we want the second dose, the booster, to get the immune system reactivated.
It was Catherine Brewster who had me reactivated.
Once that reactivation takes place, immunogenicity is achieved typically 7 to 10 days after the booster is given. And when people do experience the immune reactions from the messenger RNA vaccine, it's not with the first dose typically, it's after the booster dose. The independent board that analyzes the participants in the study found that severe side effects included fatigue, muscle pain, joint pain, and headache. Less than 2% had fevers of 39 to 40 degrees Celsius that lasted a day or two. For the Pfizer vaccine, the numbers were lower. Severe side effects included fatigue and headache. Now, compared to the flu shot, including the high-dose flu shot, these numbers are actually slightly higher. But otherwise, the trials showed that these vaccines are safe and they're very, very effective. In Moderna's clinical trial, they gave either the vaccine or placebo to 30,000 people. Of the 15,000 who received the vaccine, 11 developed COVID-19. Of the 15,000 who received the placebo, 185 developed COVID-19. That's 94.1% efficacy. None of the 11 people who received the vaccine became severely ill, but 30 of the 185 who received the placebo did become severely ill, and one of them died. The vaccine had similar efficacy for elderly people and for people in the racial minority groups when they did the breakdown of the groups. And in Pfizer's clinical trial, the vaccine actually was 95% effective, and one study participant who received the vaccine developed a severe case of COVID-19. So both of them give 95% efficacy against symptomatic disease and almost 100% against severe disease. But there are still some unknowns though, like how long does the protection last? Does it protect against asymptomatic disease? Does it prevent people from spreading the virus to others? Do I still need the vaccine if I've already had COVID? Is the vaccine safe for me with my underlying medical condition, such as whatever that may be? We know that protection from the vaccine is at least as good as protection that comes when someone has an actual infection. We know this protection lasts at least months and probably about a year. This is based on the levels of protective antibodies that are being measured in studies. And this data is going to be published in a peer-reviewed journal in the near future. But if you are vaccinated, you probably have a low likelihood of transmitting it. The same is likely true if you've been previously infected. But again, we're waiting on studies to know for sure. And if you've already had COVID-19, do you really need the vaccination? At this time, the recommendation is yes, because it's thought that there's probably better immunogenicity with the vaccine, but this is not 100% certain. Because this vaccine is not live attenuated vaccine, it's safe for people who have underlying medical conditions, including those with compromised immune systems, for example, cancer patients who get chemotherapy. But for pregnant women and breastfeeding women, we don't know if it's safe because there are no trials yet. So for now, no vaccine for these women. The two messenger RNA vaccines have to be stored in super cold temperature. Why? Because mRNA is super fragile and therefore has to be cased in lipid nanoparticles. So these nanoparticles are tiny fat chemicals called lipids, which that's what triglycerides are. That's what HDL and LDL are. Well, lipid nanoparticles protect the fragile mRNA from being destroyed. But lipid nanoparticles, just like butter, start to soften and melt if it's too warm. So Pfizer's vaccine must be kept at temperatures of minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 75 Celsius. Which throws a big wrench into the whole let's plan on making and distributing hundreds of millions of vaccines plan. And that means special equipment is needed to transport and store this vaccine. Moderna thinks its approach is better and said its vaccine can be shipped at minus 20 degrees Celsius and can be kept stable for 30 days at 2 degrees to 8 degrees Celsius, which is the temperature of a standard home refrigerator. So distributing these vaccines is going to be a huge challenge to say the least. Not only because of this, but also because of the necessary manufacturing of vials and other equipment on such a massive scale, especially with these mRNA vaccines. And these vaccines alone can't cover the entire US population, at least not yet. AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Novavax all have vaccines in phase 3 clinical trials. AstraZeneca's vaccine, made in Britain at Oxford University, is an example of a vector vaccine, which is one of the traditional ways of making a vaccine. In this instance, it uses a common cold virus, specifically it's called an adenovirus, to carry a very specific piece of DNA into the cells of the body. This DNA, once inside the cells, then codes for a specific RNA that ultimately codes for a specific protein, the spike protein of the coronavirus. Then the immune system does its thing. Now, some people might say, well, I don't want an adenovirus being injected into me to accomplish this. Relax. This adenovirus has been genetically modified in a lab to be harmless. Cheers to science. Although it is a slower way of making vaccines and it's cheaper, it can be kept stable for 6 months at standard refrigerator temperatures. AstraZeneca reported that their vaccine prevented coronavirus infection 62% of the time when people got 2 doses a month apart. But in a subgroup of volunteers who got a half dose followed by a full dose a month later, the vaccine was 90% effective. So overall, it averages out to about 70% efficacy, and there aren't any safety concerns based on these studies. Then there's Janssen's vaccine, which is owned by Johnson & Johnson. It's also a recombinant vector vaccine like AstraZeneca's vaccine. And there are other vaccines on the horizon as well, like Novavax, Sanofi, GlaxoSmithKline, Sinovac, Sinopharm, that use other vaccine methods. Some of them use protein subunits. Some of them use killed coronaviruses. But we don't need to get into those for this video. So who is going to get this vaccine and when are they going to get it? The FDA has a group of vaccine advisors called the Vaccines and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee, or VRBPAC for short. This group is made up of outside experts who don't have a stake in any of the companies making coronavirus vaccines, and they're independent of the federal government. They're meeting December 10th to decide on giving EUA for Pfizer's vaccine. They meet again on December 17th for Moderna's vaccine. Once the meetings happen, there's going to be a decision that's soon going to follow on whether or not to give the green light on the vaccine, and the federal government's Operation Warp Speed has promised to start delivering vaccines within 24 hours of the green light. Pfizer and Moderna have already been making these vaccines to get a head start on the process, and expect to have 40 million doses at the end of December. AstraZeneca is likely to seek U.S. approval by January. Johnson & Johnson has said it will have efficacy data by January or February. Novavax is a little farther behind, but all of these companies will be producing vaccines and expect them to be rolled out in the early spring. So I was alluding to this before, but I'll explain it in more depth now. Before a vaccine is submitted for FDA authorization, there's an independent data monitoring committee, the DMC, that reviews clinical trial data to confirm that it's safe and effective. The committee is made up of career scientists who have experience serving in a DMC, and they have relevant expertise and experience in clinical trials. And this is in according to the FDA guidance. They also monitor study conduct and even consider interim changes depending on new data that may emerge from other studies. About half the trial participants in these studies must be 2 months past their second vaccine shot, as severe adverse effects are more likely to happen within the first 6 weeks. So the DMC looked at these studies by Moderna and Pfizer and they said there weren't any safety concerns. If most of the country gets vaccinated by the end of next summer, we'll probably go back to normalcy again by next fall. We're still going to need masks and distancing, etc., until we achieve herd immunity and when the numbers are significantly down. Remember, even if you are vaccinated, we don't know for sure at this point if it's still possible to transmit the virus, although it's pretty unlikely. So to give a date on when this will likely happen, probably next fall. Now, some might say, well, aren't the symptoms that you get from the vaccine, like the arm pain, like the fatigue, like the fevers, chills, sweats, nausea, isn't that worse than actually getting the coronavirus infection? Well, first of all, less than 10 to 15% of people who get the vaccination will have these side effects of the vaccination. And the other thing too is, well, even if you're young and healthy, that doesn't guarantee that you don't get sick from coronavirus. So yes, some people might actually have worse symptoms from the vaccination compared to if they were actually to become infected with coronavirus. But the key word there is some. This is going to be a very small number. And also, by getting the vaccine, you're contributing towards society's common goal of reaching herd immunity and ultimately moving on from this pandemic. Are mutations going to affect the vaccination? Well, there have been some mutations in this virus, but not that are very significant. There haven't been any significant mutations that are particularly concerning when it comes to the vaccination aspect of things, but also for the infectivity of the virus. And it's likely to remain this way. Okay, I'm exhausted, but making this video is important. I hope people get the vaccine and I hope this pandemic fades away.